Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Sukkah. We are up to Perek Gimel, Mishnah Yud Gimel. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbayev, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden, Amen. And Laavdil ben Chaim L'Chaim for the Refuah Shelema, Bacha Bat Esther, and Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Betoch Shah Chulei Israel. When the temple stood, the mitzvah of the four species was observed on the first day of Sukkot, even when it fell on Shabbat, both inside and outside the temple. The rabbis decreed that the mitzvah may not be observed on Shabbat, even in the temple, because someone might desecrate Shabbat by carrying the four species in a public domain. However, they did not apply their decree when the first day of Sukkot fell on a Shabbat. However, carrying the species in a public domain on Shabbat is a biblical transgression, so the Mishnah describes how this transgression was avoided outside the temple. Another Mishnah, chapter 4, Mishnah 4, will explain how the mitzvah was observed on Shabbat in the temple. Our Mishnah begins, Yom Tov Arishon Shel Chag Shechal Liot B'Shabbat. When the first Yom Tov of the festival, the first day of Sukkot, fell on Shabbat, Kol ha'am molichin et ulvehen lebet knesset. All the people would bring the lulavim, the four species, to the synagogue before Shabbat, because it is biblically forbidden to carry them in the street on Shabbat. They brought the four species to the synagogue rather than fulfill the mitzvah at home, so that they would be able to wave them when they recite Hallel with the congregation. Lamachorad mashkiminu ba'in. The next day, Shabbat, they would come to the synagogue early in the morning. Kol echad ve'echad makir et shelo v'not lo. Each one would recognize his own lulav and take it to perform the mitzvah. Everyone had to use his own lulav and not borrow someone else's, even with the owner's permission. Because the sages said that a person cannot fulfill his obligation on the first day of the festival with the lulav of his friend. On the other days of the festival, however, a person can fulfill his obligation with the lulav of his friend. Now, the biblical law requiring ownership of the four species applies only on the first day of the Sukkot and not on the other 6 days, as the Gemara says on page 29b and 36b of Masechet Sukkah. Now, the Mishnah's words the sages said refer to their explanation of the Torah law, not to an independent rabbinic law, and that is in a Mishnah Yud Gimel. Mishnah Yud Daled now continues. As stated in the previous Mishnah, when the temple stood, the mitzvah of taking the four species on the first day of Sukkot applied even on Shabbat. This Mishnah discusses the law of someone who mistakenly carried them in a public domain on Shabbat. Rabbi Yossi says, Yom Tov Arishon Shel Chag Shechal Liot B'Shabbat. When the first day of the festival falls on Shabbat, V'shachach ve'otzia et halulav lirshut harabim, and one forgot that it was Shabbat, or he forgot that carrying is forbidden on Shabbat, and carried the lulav out of a private domain into a public domain in preparation for the mitzvah. For example, he carried them to the synagogue to perform the mitzvah there. Patur, he is not liable to bring a hatat offering as one usually is for mistakenly desecrating Shabbat, because he carried it with permission, meaning he carried it for the sake of the mitzvah. Although he was biblically forbidden to carry it even for this purpose, Rabbi Yossi holds that one who mistakenly desecrates Shabbat because he was busy with the mitzvah does not have to bring a chatat offering. Now, Rabbi Yossi's words with permission are not meant literally, because in fact, carrying the four species in a public domain on Shabbat is biblically prohibited, even if he needs to do so for the sake of the mitzvah. Rather, Rabbi Yossi's point is that it was the person's preoccupation with the mitzvah, which is otherwise obligatory, that caused him to forget that the day was Shabbat. Even according to Rabbi Yossi, a person who carries the four species after performing the mitzvah is obligated to bring a chatat offering, since he is no longer busy with the mitzvah. This leads to a problem, however, because as soon as one picks up the four species, he fulfills the biblical mitzvah, and any subsequent carrying is after the mitzvah. Why then does Rabbi Yossi rule that he does not need to bring a chatat offering for carrying them outside? So the Rav says we must say that Mishnah refers to a person who picked up the species and carried them in such a way that he did not fulfill the obligation. For example, they were upside down or in a box. Therefore, when he took them outside, he was still occupied with the mitzvah. And the Rav does tell us, V'alakha ki Rabbi Yossi, the Halakha follows the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. And that is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.